The embarrassing silence echoed through the hall of Chez Laurent, while Ayesha Curry remained standing before the most distant table in the restaurant, feeling the weight of dozens of curious and judgmental gazes. Her hands trembled slightly, holding her purse, while Carlos Mendez, the maitre d', looked at her with a poorly disguised contempt that cut like ice. "Madam, perhaps you would feel more comfortable in an establishment more suitable to your profile," he said, each word loaded with subtle venom that made the surrounding air seem denser. To understand how one of San Francisco's most respected women arrived at this moment of public humiliation, we need to go back a few hours, when Ayesha still believed that a night dedicated to charity would be just that, charity. It was a Tuesday in October, and San Francisco's golden autumn painted the city with that magical light that makes everything seem like a dream. Ayesha was at home, getting ready for the annual benefit dinner of the Eat, Learn, Play Foundation, which she and Steph had created to support children in underserved communities. Have you ever had that feeling that something special was about to happen? That was exactly what Ayesha felt while choosing an elegant but not ostentatious navy blue dress. She wanted to be presentable for the donors, but without exaggerating. After all, the night was about the children, not about her. "You look beautiful," said Steph, kissing his wife's forehead before leaving for Warriors practice. "Sorry I can't go with you, but you know how these events are. You shine brighter than I do even when I'm there." Ayesha smiled, feeling that familiar warmth that comes from a marriage built on mutual support and shared purpose. "Don't worry, love. I'll represent our foundation well." What's most impressive is how we can feel completely prepared for a situation and discover that we actually weren't prepared for anything at all. Ayesha arrived at Chez Laurent at 7:30 in Fidudar the evening, exactly on the agreed time. The restaurant was one of those places that breathes sophistication through every detail. Crystals that capture light like diamonds, the low murmur of refined conversations, the complex aroma of dishes that cost more than many people earn in a week. She had been there before, a few times, always with Steph, or at official Warriors events. But this time, she was alone, and that changed everything in a way she didn't yet fully understand. "Good evening," said Ayesha, as she approached the reception counter, where Carlos Mendez was checking a list with the meticulous precision of someone who considers his position a form of power. He looked up slowly, as if her presence were an unwanted interruption in his impeccable routine. It was possible to feel that something had changed in the atmosphere, like when dark clouds cover the sun on a perfect day. "How may I help you?" he asked, and there was something in the tone that made the word help sound like a reluctant concession. "I have a reservation for the benefit dinner of the Eat, Learn, Play Foundation, Ayesha Curry." He looked at the list, then at her, then back at the list, with a deliberate slowness that seemed designed to create discomfort. Curry? Curry. I don't see your name here." Ayesha's heart gave a small jump. There must be some mistake. The reservation was made by the Foundation's team 2 weeks ago. "Madam," he said, his voice taking on a tone she immediately recognized as condescension masked as professionalism. "Our establishment serves a very specific clientele. Perhaps there was a misunderstanding about the type of event we host. Have you ever felt the exact moment when you realize you're being judged not by what you did, but by who you are?" In that instant, Ayesha understood that Carlos Mendez wasn't seeing Ayesha Curry, Steph Curry's wife, successful businesswoman, or co-founder of a charitable organization. He was seeing only a black woman who, in his narrow mind, didn't belong in that environment. "There must be a mistake," Ayesha repeated, keeping her voice calm despite the heat that was beginning to rise up her neck. "I can show the confirmation on my phone." Lisa Rodriguez, an employee who was observing the scene a few meters away, whispered something to another staff member, and both laughed quietly. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was the kind of laugh that excludes, that diminishes, that hurts. "Look," said Carlos Mendez, leaning slightly forward with that forced intimacy that people use when they want to sound confidential but are being cruel. "I'll be honest with you, madam. This isn't the kind of place where people like you usually feel comfortable. People like you." The words echoed in Ayesha's mind like an echo in an empty cave. How many times in life does a simple phrase carry the weight of centuries of injustice? The air in the restaurant seemed to have become denser, as if every oxygen molecule had been replaced by embarrassment and tension. The murmur of conversations continued around them, but Ayesha felt as if she were inside a bubble of silence, where only humiliation had a voice. "I'm sure there's been a misunderstanding," Ayesha managed to say, her voice sounding weaker than she would have liked. "Our foundation works with underserved children. It's a benefit event." "Ah, of course," he said, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Charity. How admirable. But you see, madam, our restaurant has a reputation to maintain, an atmosphere that our regular clients expect." It was impossible not to feel that every word was calculated to make Ayesha feel small, inadequate, out of place. And worst of all, for a terrible moment, it worked. Ayesha, who had built a multi-million-dollar company, who had created a foundation that had already impacted thousands of children, who had been on the covers of national magazines, felt diminished by a man who probably earned in a year what she moved in a month. Great things happen when we refuse to let other people define our dignity. But in that moment, Ayesha was still learning this lesson in the most painful way possible. The phone vibrated in Ayesha's purse. It was a message from Steph. "How's the event, love? I hope it's being incredible." If he knew that his wife was being treated like an intruder in a place where they had spent thousands of dollars on previous dinners, where they had celebrated victories and supported important causes. But Steph didn't know. Not yet. In exactly 27 minutes, that would change. And when it changed, the entire world would discover what happens when someone underestimates not only a person's dignity, but the transformative power of a response based on wisdom instead of anger. Ayesha responded to Steph's message with a heart emoji, without the courage to tell the truth. How to explain that she was being treated like an intruder in the very place where her foundation had organized previous events? Carlos Mendez returned with an expression that tried to seem helpful, but carried something that made Ayesha's stomach contract. "Well, Mrs. Curry, I found your reservation," he said, pronouncing her surname with a subtle irony that cut like a thin blade. "Great," she responded, feeling a momentary relief that would soon prove premature. "However," he continued, "there was a small adjustment in the organization of the tables. I'll accommodate you in a location that I believe is more appropriate for your situation." Your situation. Another phrase loaded with hidden meanings that made Ayesha question whether she was hearing correctly, or if her mind was interpreting malice, where perhaps there was only incompetence. He led her through the main hall, passing by elegantly arranged tables where other people were already seated. Ayesha could notice the curious looks that followed her, some discreet, others not so much. it was possible to perceive that her walk was being observed and evaluated by people who seemed to be wondering if she really belonged in that environment. Have you ever walked through a place feeling that every step was a test of your legitimacy? That was exactly what Isha was experiencing, as if she were an actress on a stage where she hadn't memorized the lines. They arrived at the back of the restaurant, near the kitchen entrance, where the noise of dishes and staff conversations created a cacophony that contrasted dramatically with the serene atmosphere of the main hall. "Here it is," said Carlos Mendez, indicating a small table, clearly inferior to the others, positioned so that Isha would have her back to the rest of the restaurant. "I believe you'll feel more at ease here." The insult was so obvious it was almost crude. Anyone with half a brain would recognize that this wasn't the table for someone who had made a reservation for an important benefit event. It was the table where they put people they want to hide. "This table seems a bit isolated," Isha commented, trying to maintain diplomacy despite the indignation that was growing in her chest, like a storm forming. "Madam, our restaurant serves diverse profiles of clients," said Lisa Rodriguez, who had approached with a forced smile. "We think you'll feel more comfortable away from the movement of the main hall." Diverse profiles of clients, away from the movement. Every euphemism was like a drop of acid slowly falling on Isha's dignity. She sat at the table, not because she accepted the situation, but because she needed a moment to process what was happening. What's most impressive is how our mind tries to rationalize absurd situations, looking for explanations that allow us to maintain faith in humanity. Maybe it really was a misunderstanding. Maybe the table's location was just a logistical matter. Maybe. But then Isha heard the whispers. "I don't know how some people have the courage to come to places like this," commented a woman at the nearest table, her voice low but not low enough. "Must be nouveau riche," another responded. "You know how it is, right? Money doesn't buy class." "At least the staff knows how to deal with this type of situation," added a man. "Discreetly, without causing embarrassment for the other clients." Have you ever felt like your heart was being squeezed by an invisible hand? In that moment, Isha understood that she wasn't just facing a misunderstanding. She was facing something much deeper and more systematic. She tried to concentrate on the menu, but the words seemed to dance before her eyes. Her mind was divided between indignation and a deep sadness that came from realizing that, even in 2023, even being who she was, there were still people willing to judge her by the color of her skin before anything else. Lisa Rodriguez returned to the table, this time with an expression that mixed false sympathy with condescension. "Have you decided what you're going to order? Or perhaps you'd prefer to take a look at the special menu we have for certain occasions?" "Special menu?" asked Isha, confused. "Well, it's just that some people feel more comfortable with more familiar options. We don't want you to feel obligated to try dishes that might not be within your usual gastronomic universe." Within your usual gastronomic universe. The phrase echoed in Isha's mind like a funeral bell. They were literally assuming that she didn't have enough culinary sophistication to appreciate the restaurant's food. "Thank you," she managed to say, her voice sounding more controlled than she felt. "But I think I can handle the regular menu." Lisa laughed, a low laugh that carried disdain. Of course, just trying to help." As the employee walked away, Isha heard a conversation at the next table that made her blood freeze. "At least they know how to keep that type of people away from the important tables," said a man in an expensive suit. "Imagine if they let her sit near the real clients." It's a matter of maintaining standards, agreed his companion. Places like this exist exactly to separate. Well, you understand. How many times in life are we confronted with the reality that there are still people who see us as less human? In that moment, all of Isha's achievements, all her business success, all her dedication to philanthropy, none of that mattered to those people. She was just a black woman in a place where they believed black women shouldn't be. Isha picked up her phone to send a message to Steph, but stopped. What would she say? Love, I'm being humiliated because I'm black. How to put into words an experience that cuts so deep? It was then that Carlos Mendez returned, this time with an expression that no longer tried to hide his true intention. Mrs. Curry, he said, his voice low but firm, I received some observations from our regular clients. It seems that your presence is causing a certain discomfort in the environment. Discomfort, Isha repeated, feeling as if she were in a bad dream. Look, I'll be direct with you. You're trying to pass yourself off as someone you clearly are not. Our clients pay premium prices for an authentic experience, and frankly, you're causing questionings, trying to pass yourself off as someone you clearly are not. The words hit Isha like a punch to the stomach. They weren't just questioning her presence, they were questioning her identity, her legitimacy, her very existence in that space. Great things happen when we decide that our dignity is non-negotiable, but sometimes we first need to pass through the valley of humiliation to find our strength. So, what are you suggesting? Asked Isha, although she already knew the answer. That you leave before causing more embarrassment? For all of us. In that moment, something inside Isha broke. Not from despair, but from a crystalline clarity that cut through all the confusion and pain. She understood that she wasn't just facing individual ignorance, but an entire system designed to make people like her feel inferior. Isha picked up her phone and typed a message to Steph. I need you to come to Chez Laurent. Now, please. Little did she know that, in less than 12 minutes, the entire world would discover what happens when you underestimate not only a person's dignity, but the power of someone who understands that true. Greatness isn't measured by titles or achievements, but by how you respond to injustice in the moments that truly define your character. The storm was coming, and Steph Curry was about to show Carlos Mendez and the entire world that some lessons can only be taught through the silent example of wisdom in action. Isha was typing a second message to Steph when the glass doors of the restaurant opened with a smooth movement that contrasted dramatically with the electric tension that dominated the doughy environment around the isolated table. Steph Curry entered with that natural presence that made heads turn automatically. It wasn't just about fame. It was about a genuine energy that transformed any space. The murmur of conversations gradually ceased, like waves receding from the beach. Isha. His voice carried relief and concern in equal measures. He had seen the message at the traffic light and abandoned practice immediately. Sorry for coming, but you seemed… well, you never asked me to come like this. Carlos Mendez and Lisa Rodriguez straightened instantly, like soldiers who had just spotted the general. The transformation was so sudden it was almost comical, if it weren't so revealing. Mr. Curry! Carlos practically jumped from behind the counter, his voice now as sweet as melted sugar. What an honor to have you in our establishment. How may I help you? Steph looked from Carlos to Isha, then back to Carlos. Have you ever witnessed the exact moment when someone understands a complex situation just by observing body language and the environment's energy? Isha was sitting at the restaurant's most distant table, clearly isolated, with an expression that Steph knew well, the same one she had when trying to maintain composure after being deeply hurt. "Actually," said Steph, his voice maintaining that cordial tone his fans knew well, "I came to check on my wife. She said she needed me." "Your wife?" Carlos stammered, suddenly lost. I, well, I didn't know that." Steph walked to the table where Isha was sitting, noticing the strategically humiliating location, away from all the other clients. His jaw contracted slightly, the only visible sign that he was processing something much deeper than a simple logistical issue. "Isha," he said, sitting beside her and taking her hand, "tell me what happened." The silence that followed was different from all the others. It was the kind of silence that precedes earthquakes. Isha took a deep breath and, with a calm voice but loaded with contained pain, began to recount the last 40 minutes. Every word she spoke made Steph's face more serious. Not with anger, with something much more powerful, deep disappointment and crystalline determination. When Isha finished, Steph remained silent for a moment that seemed eternal. Carlos and Lisa had approached, clearly nervous, trying to hear the conversation. Then Steph stood up and turned to Carlos, but there was no confrontation in his posture. There was something much more impactful. The absolute calm of someone who was about to teach a lesson that would change lives. "Mr. Mendez," said Steph, and his voice had that quality that made entire stadiums fall silent. "Could you explain to me why my wife was treated this way?" Carlos visibly paled. "Mr. Curry, there was a misunderstanding. Security procedures. We didn't know." "Didn't know what?" Steph interrupted gently. "Didn't know she was my wife? Or didn't know she was a human being who deserves basic respect?" The question echoed through the restaurant like a bell. It was possible to feel how other people had stopped their activities to listen. "Because I'll tell you something," continued Steph, his voice maintaining that hypnotic cadence that made each word penetrate deeply. "Ayesha Curry doesn't deserve respect because she's my wife. She deserves respect because she's a human being." Steph paused, allowing his words to settle like dust after an explosion. "She's a businesswoman who built a culinary empire from scratch. She's a best-selling author. She's a dedicated mother raising 3 extraordinary children. She's a philanthropist who dedicates thousands of hours helping underserved children through our foundation." Steph's voice gained an intensity that made the surrounding air seem charged with electricity. "But more important than any of these achievements, she's a person who treats waiters, janitors, security guards, and CEOs with the same dignity and respect. Because she understands something that you clearly don't understand." Steph turned to all the people in the restaurant, clients and staff who had witnessed the entire situation. A person's true character isn't measured by how much money they have, what clothes they wear, or what color their skin is. It's measured by how they treat other human beings, especially those they think can't do anything for them. In that moment, something extraordinary happened. An elderly client, who had made derogatory comments earlier, stood up and walked to Isha. "Mrs. Curry," she said, her voice choked, "I ask for forgiveness. I didn't know who you were, but that doesn't matter. I shouldn't have spoken that way about anyone." Other people began to approach, not because of Steph's fame, but because they had just witnessed a masterclass on human dignity that touched something deep in their consciences. Steph placed his hand on Carlos Mendez's shoulder. "Great things happen when we Choose to see the humanity in every person, regardless of who they are or where they come from. Today, you have the chance to choose what kind of establishment you want to be. Carlos was visibly emotional. Mr. Curry, Mrs. Curry, I don't know what to say. There's no excuse for what happened here. Yes, there is, said Steph. The excuse is that you're human, and humans make mistakes. The question is, what are you going to do from now on? What's most impressive is how moments of profound injustice can transform into opportunities for growth when faced with wisdom instead of anger. Steph took Isha's hand. Love, shall we go home? But before leaving, Steph turned one last time to the crowded restaurant. For everyone who witnessed what happened here today, remember, every person you meet is fighting a battle you don't know about. Be kind, always. As they left the restaurant, Isha knew that those 27 minutes had changed more than just her night. They had changed the lives of several people who witnessed what happens when someone decides to respond to injustice with education, dignity, and a wisdom that echoes far beyond the present moment. True greatness had just manifested itself, and the entire world was about to discover how a lesson about humanity can spread like waves in a lake, touching hearts far beyond the walls of a simple restaurant. 3 weeks later, Carlos Mendez was in the same Chez Laurent restaurant, but everything had changed. The BBU environment that once breathed toxic exclusivity now carried a completely different energy. It was possible to perceive that something fundamental had transformed not just in the atmosphere, but in the soul of that place. He wasn't there just fulfilling his routine. He was there because he had chosen to become a different person. "Good evening, madam," said Carlos to a young woman who entered alone, wearing simple but clean clothes. "How may I help you tonight?" There was no hesitation in his voice. There was no judgment in his eyes. There was something that didn't exist before: genuine respect for every human being who crossed that door. The transformation had begun at the exact moment Steph and Ayesha Curry left the restaurant that October night. Carlos had stood in the middle of the hall, feeling the weight of Steph's words echoing in his conscience, like bells that simply wouldn't stop ringing. True character is measured by how you treat other human beings, especially those you think can't do anything for you. That phrase had become an involuntary mantra that emerged in his mind at every interaction, every client, every moment of choice between automatic prejudice and conscious humanity. What's most impressive is how a single lesson can completely rewrite the programming of an entire lifetime. Lisa Rodriguez had undergone an even deeper transformation. She didn't just change her way of treating clients. She became an active defender of human dignity in the workplace. "Carlos," she said that first morning after the incident, "we need to talk to the entire staff. What happened yesterday? This can't happen here anymore. Never again." They organized training sessions on respect and inclusion. Not because upper management demanded it, but because they had understood that working in an environment that diminishes people also diminishes those who work there. But the real transformation happened when the video spread. A client had discreetly recorded the last minutes of Steph's interaction in the restaurant. Not with malicious intent, but because she knew she had witnessed something special. Something the world needed to see. The video was posted with the caption, "How a Man Transforms Injustice into Education in Real Time." In 48 hours, it had 20 million views. In a week, it had been translated into 30 languages. In a month, it had become one of the most shared videos in history about respect and human dignity. But the numbers didn't tell the real story. The real story was in the comments. Tens of thousands of people sharing how that moment had changed their way of seeing and treating other human beings. A bank manager from Detroit wrote, "I always judged clients by their appearance. After seeing this video, I started treating every person as if they were the most important of my day. My bank has never had such high ratings." A teacher from Chicago commented, "I showed this video to my students. Now, when they see bullying, they don't stay silent. They educate." A businessman from São Paulo posted, "I changed all the customer service policies of my company. Human dignity is not optional, it's mandatory. Have you ever seen how a stone thrown into a lake creates waves that reach shores you didn't even know existed?" That was exactly what was happening with Steph Curry's lesson. 6 months after that night, Ayesha received an unexpected invitation. Chez Laurent wanted to honor her, not as a celebrity, but as the person who had helped transform their institutional culture. "Mrs. Curry," said Carlos when she arrived for the event, "you changed our lives, not just as professionals, but as human beings." Ayesha smiled, but there was something deep in her eyes that showed the lesson had changed her too. "Carlos, you changed yourselves. I was just present when you chose to grow." During dinner, Carlos addressed everyone present: employees, regular clients, and community members. "6 months ago, I was a person who judged others by appearance, who believed that some people were more worthy of respect than others, who confused social position with human value." His voice was choked, but firm. "Steph Curry taught me that greatness isn't about how much you have, but about how much you give. Not about how you're treated, but about how you treat others." He looked directly at Ayesha. "You taught me that dignity isn't earned. It's born with every person, and my job isn't to decide who deserves it or not. It's to honor the humanity of every soul that crosses my life." In that moment, something extraordinary happened. The entire restaurant stood up in applause, not just for Ayesha, but for the transformation everyone had witnessed. Later, at home, Steph asked Ayesha, "How do you feel about all this?" She remained silent for a moment, processing a journey that had begun with humiliation and transformed into something much bigger. "Love," she finally said, "I learned that our pain can become other people's purpose when we choose to transform it into education instead of revenge." Steph hugged her, understanding that great things happen when we choose to use our influence not to destroy those who hurt us, but to build bridges of understanding that connect all humanity. 1 year later, Chez Laurent had become known not for exclusivity, but for inclusivity. Not for separating people, but for uniting them. Not for diminishing humanity, but for celebrating it. And the lesson continued, echoing from heart to heart, from life to life, from generation to generation. Because some truths are so powerful that once planted, they grow forever. The truth that every person deserves respect. The truth that dignity isn't a privilege, but a right. The truth that we can choose to respond to ignorance with wisdom, to hatred with education, and to injustice with the transformative force of conscious humanity. What's most impressive is how a moment of injustice can become a beacon of hope when responded to with the kind of wisdom that not only defends, but also teaches, and that echo never stops.